Mediawatch and say hello to James Creedon. Now, you've been
Hello.
looking at relieved reactions to the elections over in the Netherlands.
That's right. So lots of relief being expressed on social media today and through to last night as well when the results started coming in. Let's take a look at what some people were saying online. The Dutch waking up, that was this morning, with relief on this sunny day. The problem is that there is still a super Wilders in the USA, a reference to Donald J. Trump. Dutch elections, exit vote, Wilders at disappointing 13%. This is actually somebody who's happy that he's at 13%, though, so it's expressed a little bit strangely. Populism seems to have peaked in the Netherlands. In other words, it hasn't gone beyond that. Prospects are now good for France and Germany. So a lot of people hoping that this would augur well for the impending French election and the spike in populist tendencies here as well. I'm not Dutch, says this particular Twitter user, but their election results are giving me hope. Thank you for saying no to hate and bigotries. And Netherlands first, that's an echo of Donald Trump's expression, America first. That was being used by many in the Netherlands who wanted to see, I suppose, a vote in favour of Geert Wilders. And this is being turned back against Geert Wilders. Today it is the Netherlands first and Wilders second. And of course, lots of politicians reacting as well. That was François Hollande earlier today, warmly congratulating Mark Rutte for a clear victory against extremism, and a similar message coming from the German Foreign Ministry. This is good news. We need you, that being Dutch voters, for a strong Europe.
Now, The Economist has been looking at what Geert Wilders' poll showing means for Marine Le Pen here in France.
That's right. So a lot of people trying to draw a connection between the two elections. The Economist is saying not so quick, really. Political movements sometimes leap in inspirational waves from one country to another, but local circumstances really make all of the difference. They're pointing out in this article in The Economist that it's a proportional representation system in the Netherlands, and that Geert Wilders really had very little chance of ever becoming Prime Minister, whereas it's a much more rigid system here in France. It's a presidential election, a two-round vote, and in fact Marine Le Pen and the Front National have been kept out of almost all levels of government for a long time, despite rising popular support. So it isn't really reflecting the percentage of people who are voting for the Front National, and the prospect of a sudden breakthrough is therefore greater in France, says The Economist. Meanwhile, a slightly more optimistic take on things in Politico.eu. They say here, we can go back now to safely ignoring Dutch politics. Is a bit unfair for people who are passionate about Dutch politics, who are mostly Dutch, I'd imagine. But I suppose there was a lot of eyes on what was happening. For all the talk about growing Euroscepticism, the reality is that most Europeans will still support the EU, says this article for Politico.eu. Now, they say the main lesson here really is high voter turnout. The fear factor is actually good for getting out perhaps somewhat complacent progressive voters. We saw with the Brexit referendum, they're saying in this article that there was a very, very high turnout for pro-Brexit voters, a lot of them retirees. It's some 90% of 65-year-old voters and older voted for Brexit, for example, and they turned out in big numbers. Yep. We saw that the Dutch election had high voter turnout across the board, which perhaps might have seen quite a good result, I suppose, in terms of keeping the centre-right to a more limited score, and the lesson for the French election being similar, high voter turnout and a fear factor driving that.
And meanwhile, Slate.com, they're looking at the collapse of traditional left-wing party systems in current European elections.
That's right. So we've been hearing a lot about this tide of populism, the Brexit referendum, the election of Donald Trump. There was this fear that we could see the same in the Dutch election, then the French election, then the German election. And this article, along with quite a few others, is saying, look, populism is an ebb and flow. It isn't this rising tide that has been consistent. We've seen, for example, the far right was rising in Austria in the 1990s, but then it dipped away again. It's been more of an ebb and flow, something more similar to this, kind of rises and falls and peaks. And actually a clear trend that is emerging than this sort of rise of populism is the collapse of party systems. So if you look at from the 1960s right up to the year 2000, in pretty much every European country, you had a big centre-left or left-wing party and a big, strong centre-right or right-wing conservative democratic party. That has now begun to collapse. We've seen it in the Dutch election. elections where the Social Democrats plummeted from 25% at the last election to 6% in these elections. We're seeing a similar trend in the upcoming French election where the Socialist Party vote is really diminishing.
Yeah.
The Conservative Party, the Republican Party, also in serious trouble. So what other trend are we seeing in parallel with that? Interestingly, parties that are appealing to minorities and ethnic minorities. Now, in the Netherlands, you had for the first time a party called Think, which is actually which is Dutch Turkish defectors, so the Turkish minority in the Netherlands, voting for a party that broke away from the Social Democratic Party to represent specific interests related to this community. Yeah. Now, this is a first, but with large Turkish communities in Austria and Germany, and with an increasing war of words between Turkey and these two countries, perhaps we could see this trend repeating itself with parliamentary parties. It's quite small for now in the Netherlands, but that represent ethnic minorities coming in, say, other European countries. That was even a sort of dystopian vision written about in a book by Michel Houellebecq here in France, a book called Submission, where he imagined the political dynamics that would be unleashed if a party that explicitly staked its appeal to Muslim immigrants here in France should rise to prominence. So this, as Yasha Monk writes here in Slate.com, could be the big sleeping dog of European politics about to stir. So certainly things are shifting, but perhaps not in the direction of just a clear rise in populism across the board.
James Cruden, thank you very much. James Cruden with Mediawatch. We're going to take a quick break. More news coming up. Stay with us. This is France 24.